So I want to make sure we like open it up immediately for questions, but maybe you can just start giving like a brief introduction about you and like your time in the space.
Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah. A little backstory about myself. My history before NFTs was I got my degree in traditional animation. I worked in the animation industry and the TV industry for a decade or so before I got into NFTs about a little under 2 years ago. I started out on Super Rare and then started to slowly expand into other platforms, whether it was doing editions on Rarible or then doing Nifty Gateway launches about a year ago. Shortly after that, I started experimenting with more niche platforms like async music. I was the Genesis piece on that. And then also I was one of the early art blocks pieces, which is generative art. And so after a certain point, I felt like a year into my work, I was ready to like start to experiment in the space. And that's when things got really fun. And so, yeah, in that time, since then, I've kind of dabbled with a lot of different platforms. I've been fortunate to, um, my work is connected with a lot of people. I've seen it appear in some auction houses like Sotheby's and Christie's this year, which is very wild. And yeah, at this point, I'm just a full-time NFT artist, making all sorts of different concepts and projects.
Cool. Thank you for the intro. I will open it up to questions from everybody here or anything that you'd like to ask. Feel free to unmute, or I can also read out the questions from the screen.
Hello, hello, Brian. My name is Pierre. I'm a crypto artist. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and I never heard about your work before this meeting, and I immediately jumped on Twitter to check out what you're doing, and I find your series with the clouds and the again, please. That was my phone. Sorry. And I find this is so poetic. This is so beautiful. There is so many emotion in all these individual clouds. How did you get the idea to do such a poetic and meaningful word?
Oh, thank you. I'm a fellow New Yorker. I live up in Westchester, New York. Yeah, so the clouds came about a year ago when I did my first Nifty Gateway drop. I thought there was something interesting about clouds because one, the tech, all the image hosting, we're all kind of living in the digital cloud, but then also, in terms of something that we as humans are exposed to every single day, it's just clouds, and I think I always kind of considered them to be like nature's generative art in a weird, like in a very silly way of thinking about it. But like that, like kind of appealed to me, and like, oh, you can make, and clouds are completely randomized, and there's something really beautiful about that. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing a lot of now with generative art and GAN art and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I kind of brought into that, and it also kind of falls into um, this bigger idea I had when I joined the space, which was when I joined, I found a lot of crypto art was kind of this grungy, glitchy, kind of dark X copy type work. And I came from this kind of traditional animation world where I was like, well, maybe I can bring in some, colorful aesthetics, something that feels like it doesn't necessarily fit in the space yet, but I think there's a corner that hasn't been used as much. There was artists like Joy who was kind of doing that kind of stuff really well. But that was kind of when I joined the space, a big part of my uh, thesis was I came from like the LA gallery worlds where um, everybody expects you to do the same thing over and over. If they put you in their show, they want you to make a piece that looks like what you're famous for. And I always found that to be creatively limiting and kind of stunting your growth. And so when I joined the space, I instead of sticking to one style, I stuck to a color palette. And so I use the same like 4 or 5 colors in almost every piece of art I do. And that was my way of like, I could do a 3D piece here, I could do a generative piece here, I could do these cloud things, but as long as the strings that are holding those clouds have those colors, then it still ties into all this other stuff. And so the strings are a common theme in my work that also kind of just talk about the connection of the artist to the space and the collectors and how we're all kind of in this ecosystem together. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. I mean, you're a true poet. This is pure poetry, even if you don't use words. So that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pierre. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Hey Brian, I just found your work through this meeting, this class, and I don't know, like I just would like to know how you started in crypto and how it's been changing your life through these years. I just love to hear.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first time I heard about Ethereum was through CryptoKitties, but like most people, I couldn't figure out how to effectively make a wallet at the time, and kind of missed my opportunity to get in really early. And so I would say about almost 2 years ago, exactly in December of 2019, this artist who I had met a few times and collected his work. His name's Killer Acid. He's one of the first artists that was on Super Rare, and so when I followed him on Instagram, I saw him sharing, "Hey, I'm selling this animation, this animated GIF on this platform," and that was the first time I was kind of exposed to what NFTs were. And so I kind of looked at Super Rare. I kind of looked around for like a month trying to understand what NFTs were and what Ethereum was, because I didn't understand what that symbol, the little 3 dashes, meant. And I was like, what are people actually paying for these? Like, I understood the idea of people buying digital assets, but I didn't fully wrap my mind around the crypto thing right away. And so I got into crypto via NFTs. So I'm a little bit different than a lot of kind of the OG artists of the space that kind of were already doing crypto in various forms, and then NFTs kind of became a part of that. And so, yeah, I think that was my introduction. And prior to that, I was mostly just working in um, television. I worked on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon for like 8 years. I work on SNL doing the visual effects for their pre-tapes. So I was kind of writing this like television world for a long time while I was doing small gallery shows in LA, but none of that was sustainable to make a living. You'd sell a piece and you'd get maybe $100, $200 because the galleries take 50%, and people just don't pay that much for physical art unless you're a really notable person. And so that shift in NFTs, it took a while before things started to really pick up. I was fortunate to have collectors early on, but when I joined the space, one of ones were selling for $200, which to me was the equivalent of what I was making for my physical work out in LA. And I was like, well, this is, I don't have to go to the post office and ship it to LA. This seems like a way better deal because I can add animation. I'm not limited by what I can do physically. And so that kind of inspired me. And so I made an effort to make about one piece every 2 weeks for the first 10 months in the space. And so by the end of that, I had, 20 super rare one of ones. And I kind of kept that pace to keep scarcity, but also just like force me to be creative and put out stuff regularly. So I did that. And then, yeah, I think it took about a year in the space before things really started to pick up, because I think as an artist in the space, you have to build trust with collectors, with the community, that you're going to be in this, you really care about it, and you're not going to just take your early earnings and run and go back to whatever you were doing. And so I think it was about the time I got my second Nifty Gateway drop lined up. I had made enough through NFTs to kind of cover my yearly salary. And so I was like, well, all these people are investing in me. I should be giving them 100% of my energy if they're going to be putting their faith and their money into my work. And that was when I left Fallon in about which was about February, April of this year. And I was like, I have enough money. See how this goes. And thankfully, things have been going very well. The space has only continued to grow, and I'm thankful that I've been able to kind of grow with it.
Amazing. That's really inspiring. So thank you for answering me.
There's one question from Zareen. I'm going to read it out. It says, "Where do you imagine taking the cloud project, or any projects you're looking forward to develop further?"
Yeah. So the Nimbuds, that project is actually a collaboration I did with my buddy Manny, who I've known since I went to college for animation. We went to the same college together, and then we both worked together on the television shows at NBC at SNL, and he worked at Seth Meyers. And so about a year ago, I reached out. We sat next to each other at these shows for the longest time. So I was like, hey, he was getting really into programming, and I was like, I think there's this new way that, because he was struggling to kind of figure out how he could fit into NFTs. I was like, I think there's a way that we could take my Nifty Gateway Cloud project and kind of retrofit it in a way into this Art Blocks platform, because I'd seen Lux Pre do that with his Super Rare pieces, where he kind of replicated what he was doing on Super Rare in Art Blocks. And I was like, oh, this is a really fascinating way of kind of making cheap editions that are all unique, that are also on chain and interactive. And I thought that part was really, groundbreaking at the time. And so me and him kind of worked together for a month or so and put out this project Nimbuds, which has also grown with the space, which is really fantastic. And then where do I go from there? I think with that project, I've been open to letting the Nimbuds become a part of other projects. Like they're part of I think Superstar Sailors, and also the Crypto Dick Butts, which is a very silly project, but they were like, hey, can we make this a special trait? And it's like, of course. And so I think the next step, me and Manny are working on a follow-up, which haven't announced yet, but it's going to be called Nim Teens, where the Nimbuds grow up and become these kind of awkward teenagers, and it's their class photos. And I think that would be I think there's something interesting about like every year the Nimbuds could grow another stage older in their life spans, because the Nimbuds are like the babies, and then you'll see them become teenagers and then adults, and so that's one of the ideas I have for it. But I also, like I said before, my goal is to never get stuck following the same stuff too much. So I'm always open to like letting the cloud stuff sit on the side for a bit and then go do some other stuff and then maybe come back to that, or integrate a cloud or a Nimbud into another piece down the road. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can build on past work without necessarily replicating it too much.
I maybe have a follow-up question to that. What do you think about, you've seen kind of the rise, let's say, of like art blocks from the very beginning up until how it is now. So what do you think about that, and in general, space of generative art?
Well, I think it's been amazing to watch the rise. One, I think, Nicole, we talked about art blocks very early on, and it was very hard for people to fully grasp what they were looking at. There was an education gap, and so in terms of people looking at, like, say, a Nimbud, and they go, "Oh, you could have made that in Photoshop in 5 minutes." I was like, "No, you don't understand. This is all entirely JavaScript code." And so I think that seeing how in the past 10 months the education of generative art has exceeded my expectations, in terms of everyone kind of knows what it is now, which I don't have to then explain. I don't have to feel defensive when I talk about these projects. And so I think that's a huge part of it. And I think the space we're constantly seeing the technology that's allowed from it. Like some of these things, like some of the art blocks are entire video games within them. It's really incredible to see like how far people are able to stretch a small bit of code into a whole bunch of different things. And I think one of the interesting things about the art blocks project that I didn't fully anticipate, I knew that there was going to be a niche audience of say a couple thousand people that really cared about it, but I never expected it to take off to the point where there's, you know, at this point, I don't know how many holders they have, but it's probably like 50 to 100,000 different collectors in that project. Um, I didn't expect it to become such a speculative gambling moment for a while there, where the site had to kind of change gears and change how they sold work because um, it attracted um, these kind of stock speculative buyers, which I think happens to any platform that gets really big. Nifty Gateway had it happen. Um, I think there's something interesting that happens at that, and when all these speculators see potential to make a bunch of money really fast, they'll come to a website and they'll overwork it to the point where the website can't handle it, and then it fails for a little while, and then it takes a few months for it to kind of pick back up and rejuvenate. And I think we saw that happen with Nifty Gateway in March and April, where they had open editions, which were a great concept, but then when thousands of people are minting multiple open editions, and it just totally destroys the scarcity and the supply and demand of the projects, it totally like wrecks the whole ecosystem. And so I think as an artist, you have to be very careful to make sure you have control over what happens with your art in that sense, open editions, or you know, if a project reaches out and they're like, hey, can we hire you to make an NFT for X amount of money and we'll give it to 10,000 people, and you go, well, that's going to really screw up my supply and demand and my scarcity of my work. You have to be very careful because those opportunities happen more often than you think, and you have to be careful to say no or to limit it and really control your product as an artist. Because as much as we're making art, we're also making products in a sense.
I don't know if there's questions on this, but I think this is a very interesting topic, and maybe we can expand on it, like the fact that like art versus product, like how do you find that balance? And you talked a little bit about scarcity, you talked about having investors. These are like, let's say, like strong words, especially coming from like an artistic like perspective. If we think about like the traditional kind of like art model, or like any model, like essentially having investors is obviously different than having like investors in a way. So maybe we can like talk a little bit about that and like how you see this and how you've approached it as well.
Yeah. So I think the way I've always kind of looked at it, and I always hate using this term, but I look at it like a pyramid. And I know a lot of people say like, oh, NFTs are a pyramid scheme, but no, I see it more of a triangle, I should say. And at the top tier is your one of ones. Those are your things that you have to keep the most scarce. Those will hold your most value. And those are the things that you really put your heart and soul into that reflect you as an artist. I think those are your most important. You have to be very careful to limit those. Then below that, you can do small edition runs, which I think, 5 to 25 are pretty solid range. And then, those allow you to kind of hit mid-tier price points for collectors that want to collect you, but don't have enough, Ethereum to buy a one of one, or don't have the confidence to enter a bidding war on an auction. I think editions are a great tool. Like I said earlier, it took me about 9 months before I started doing editions. I built up that scarcity and that demand through my one of ones early on. I think below that, you kind of hit art blocks, which is like, you can have 400 one of ones, but at a small price point of like 0.2 Ethereum. And that again allows a lot of people to collect you. And that creates, when you create artwork in large volumes like that, anything over a couple hundred editions or things like that, you start to create a mini ecosystem of collectors, and they'll if it's a healthy ecosystem, they'll do the promoting for you. They'll all band together, share their pieces with each other, get excited about owning and collecting your work. There's something magical about that I have seen since Nimbuds. You look at Bored Apes, you look at any of these Discord-based collectible PFP projects. There's a community that builds around the project, and so there's something special about that. And then to another degree, I've always found wearables or giveaways, like if you visit my CryptoVoxels parcel, you can get a postcard that says, I visited this event. Now that's kind of transforming into POAPs. These are free NFTs that people are excited to collect. There's something really special about that, in that if you can get your artwork into somebody's digital wallet in a way that they want it and they accept it, and it's not just a spam airdrop, that's something that lives in their wallet, and they're going to see it, and it's basically a business card for you as an artist, because they're going to see you every time they look at their collection in their wallet and think about you. And I think there's something really important about that aspect, and it's hard to find ways to get people to accept that. But most people are willing to take free NFTs. You just have to make sure you do it in a way that they say, yes, I want that. So I don't know if that helped expand on it, but that's kind of how I see how, when I make art, I look at it in those tiers. I want to, if I'm going to do a special piece, that'll be a one of one. If I'm doing something that's, a nifty gateway, that's a way for me to build up a larger collector base of people that can buy in at an affordable level. And you have to kind of find this balance of collectors, people that when I think about the product versus art, when you have collectors, I tend to find you need to find a balance of collectors that love your work and will hold it forever, and collectors that will let your work go at a higher price and raise your value. And you have to find kind of both sides of that. And eventually, both sides can turn into the other side, but having that balance is where you grow as an artist, is that you have people that will hold and people that will raise your value. Is if you find collectors that'll start to sell your stuff for less than devalue, those are the collectors you don't want. And so it's a learning curve, but I think overall most people, if they love your art, they're going to hold it for at least a while.
Amazing. I think this is very useful insight. Pop Art by Beba asks, the crypto art movement has allowed artists to connect with other artists and collectors alike, and we can't deny that building organic relationships within the community is necessary, yet very time consuming. How do you balance your schedule so you can keep creating while still maintaining a significant presence on Twitter?
Yeah, not very well. No, it's tough. I think I've often said, when I think about the NFT space and what it is as a job, that's something I've still learning, is how to become my own boss. Now that I'm full time in it, I have to manage myself, and it's difficult. I think for me, I break NFTs into three pieces of a pie. There's the making the art, which is a big chunk, a third of it. Then there's the promotion of the art, which is equally as important. You have to make sure when you make a piece of art, you have to educate people on what the piece means to you. You have to promote it. You have to let people know when it's available, how much it's available for. That's a whole job in itself. And then the third part is what you were mentioning, which is building meaningful relationships and connections with other people in the community, and that can only be done with time. And I think whether it's joining Discords, talking to people, joining Twitter Spaces, going to in real life events, those really make strong connections. I think it's it takes a lot of time, but you have to really find a balance of all three. And then, I'm probably not the healthiest about this because I kind of just do it all day and I jump back and forth between all these things. I'll work on some art for an hour or two, and then I'll go on Twitter and I'll either talk about my work or I'll make some joke about the NFT space because there's something valuable to just adding dialogue and content to the general space that isn't about yourself necessarily. I think people respond really well to that in a fun way. Um, and then, yeah, then just joining discords with other artists and, jumping on voice chats with other artists and either working with them to like figure out how to do their art or collaborating with other artists. I did a number of collaborations this year. I made a big point this year to try and collaborate with as many people this summer as I could, just because um, as I found more success, I saw an opportunity to kind of uplift other artists, and so I think there's something really exciting about that, and especially if you can collaborate with smaller artists that you can uplift as they grow, it only grows more value to you, and so I think there's something really wonderful about that.
Definitely. I think collaborations is, I mean, I remember collaborations as being something that I saw all the time really when I kind of started, a couple of years, like more than a year ago. I maybe see a bit less of collaborations. I don't know, maybe it's like my Twitter bubble. But I definitely see less than I was before, which I think is such like a nice kind of, like, it was so key to like the crypto art NFT movement. So yeah, I always love seeing collaborations. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I wish I had been more outgoing a year ago because it's like, I would have made more effort to like collaborate with like Sarah Zucker or a lot of money and do these kind of fun things that at the time you know, I was still new to the space in a sense that like Xcopy and them had been in the space for a few years and Coldy, um, I still felt like the new guy. Now in retrospect, everyone is like, "Oh, you're an OG because you were here 2 years ago." But at the time, I was like, "I'm not an OG. These people are the real OGs." And I felt very intimidated, and I felt like I wasn't a part of that like cool club yet. I hadn't proven myself, but really, I think that was all in my own head, and I think that kind of stuff probably held me back. That insecurity and that imposter syndrome. It's not healthy, and it doesn't it doesn't help you in the long run. It's better to be outgoing. I find 90% of the people in the space um, are happy to answer questions. They're happy to connect, and you know, I don't think people are nearly as snobby in this space as like the traditional art world, where they have like managers and galleries that force them to do very specific things. Everyone here is very open to do whatever they want, and that's kind of the beauty of it.
Definitely. Any other questions? And Cesarine is typing, and if there's any other question, feel free to unmute or type as well. But in the meantime, maybe actually something that I think might be, I guess, maybe useful for like the group is obviously, like you mentioned, a lot of like marketplaces and different platforms that you've been working with and releasing work on. How do you consciously like make those decisions of what platform to go for, and what are some of the things that you keep in mind when you decide to like onboard onto new marketplaces, do a release, etc.?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't have any favorites necessarily, but I tend to look at each marketplace for their strengths, if that makes sense. So when I make a one of one piece that I want to auction, I'll go to super rare. If I want to make a collaboration with an artist that we both get the money split effectively. You got known origin for editions, and you got foundation for one of ones. And then I've done drops on websites like Terra Virtua because I thought they had a really cool virtual reality world they were building. I don't know how far that's really come along, but I tend to look at these things and I go, well, what's the strength of this platform, and where do I fit into that strength? And so I think Nifty Gateway, I look at that for its, well, one, I tend to look at its editions of why I go there, because it's a place where you can sell your work at a lower cost to build. It's a different audience usually. That audience kind of came from the NBA Top Shot world. They're not as art centric as like Super Rare or Known Origin, but they're different, and so you can kind of create these more kind of like pop culture pieces that are more broad. And I think the thing that's interesting about Nifty Gateway is that the drop styles people use are an art in themselves, whether it was like Beeple doing a $1 drop, or these kind of open editions, or like you can kind of play around and use these burn mechanics, and you can kind of gamify the drop in a way with Nifty Gateway. The last one I did was their ranked auction, where you can sell 10 editions and people bid in to get those 10 editions, and so that there's a fun dynamic there. The same goes with I did a drop on Versus, which is on the Flow blockchain, and they have a fun dynamic where there's a choice between a 1 of 1 or a 1 of 10, and whether the single person pays more for a 1 of 1, or if a group of 10 people put all their money together to have more money as a group, is how the piece gets determined, whether it's a 1 of 1 or an addition. And I kind of enjoy that kind of gamification of the auction, because it's a new way of thinking about it. It creates a dynamic. And same thing, I'm doing a drop coming up with Nifty Royale, which is the same thing, where I'll sell 25 editions of a piece at a small price point of like 0.1 or 0.2, and then each piece competes and eventually one wins, and that winner gets a special 1 of 1 piece. And so there's kind of these fun ways of playing around with it, and that's how I look at the platforms. Is like I don't necessarily want to use Foundation if I'm on Super Rare, because it's just the same thing. It's a 1 of 1 platform, and the same goes for the Tezos platforms. That's a great way to make very cheap editions that are kind of fun, that you can build up a huge collector base very, very quickly and very cheaply. But that falls into that same idea of what I was saying with like business cards, where it's like you're selling stuff for a couple dollars, but you're in their wallet, and they're connected with you as collectors forever. And so I think there's a lot of different opportunities, a lot of different platforms, and I don't think it's about picking one necessarily, but it's about deciding which platform represents which part of your work and what you're going to create for it.
Great answer. Stefano asks probably a bit of a cliche question, but how do you see NFTs evolving in the long run? How will they impact the traditional art world?
That's a great question. One, in terms of the traditional art world, I think they're going to become a subsection. I don't know if they're going to necessarily take over the traditional art world, but I think they'll always become a part of it. As we saw with, that Sotheby sale last week, where Ethereum was able to be used to buy traditional work. I think we'll start to see, hopefully, old world collectors buying NFTs, but I don't know if it's even necessary to win them over. I think we have a new generation and a new demographic that's buying art, and I don't know if we necessarily need the traditional art world, but I think like when I was in Sotheby's and Christie's, my work sold for probably less than it would have on Super Rare. But at the same time, when I go see my grandma tomorrow for Thanksgiving, she's going to know what Sotheby's is, and she's not going to know what super rare Nifty Gateway are. And so it's a very I always find another artist asked me like, hey, should I do Sotheby's? And I'm like, well, it's impressive to people that don't matter, but it still feels good to like, have that kind of understanding to people outside the world. Like they're not going to be the ones buying your artwork, but it's a language they understand, if that makes sense. And then in terms of where do I think NFTs are going, I'm a firm believer that we'll be wearing AR and VR glasses pretty heavily in the next couple of years. And where I think NFTs are going is we're going to put on our Apple AR glasses, and we're going to have all these walls with digital artwork in our rooms, so that when people come to our house, they can see all of our digital artwork on display. And I really do believe that we're basically building a virtual, decorations for a virtual world. And art's a big part of that, but I also see NFTs becoming a part of everything in that virtual space. I think a lot of what I see in the future will be fashion. Right now, everyone's focused on what their digital face looks like, but eventually they're going to decide, hey, I'm going to be an ape, I'm going to be a cat, blah, blah, blah. And then it'll be, what do you wear day to day? And that's where the fashion comes in. What kind of shirts are you making? What kind of pants are you making? That's why I've made an effort to make wearables for Decentraland, for CryptoVoxels, for Digital X, and another one coming up with genies. I think digital wearables are a huge part of the future of NFTs. Same goes for virtual furniture and sculptures. I think GLB, like learning how to make GLB files and making really interesting virtual sculptures, will be a huge part of the space, because if you go into Decentraland, all the walls are filled with 2D art, but there's just all this empty floor space that you could be putting your virtual sculptures into and getting much more of a bigger reaction, in my mind. So I think that's a big part of where I think NFTs in my mind are going in the next couple of years, will be virtual fashion and sculptures.
Vitali also asks, could you share some tips about promoting works and building a brand in the NFT space?
Yeah. That's something I've had to learn organically through the space, because when I first started putting out pieces, I would just drop them and say, hey, I'm into a new piece on Super Rare. Once I get one bid, I'll start a 24-hour countdown. And I didn't do any promotion. And eventually, collectors were like, hey, I live in Korea. Can you give me a heads up next time? And so I think that was when I was like, okay, I should start making promos, and I should start thinking about how I release my work. And so I think within the first couple, I started using this platform called Scent, which still exists. I'm not sure how many people use it, but you could do this with your own blog too, which is I made making of articles about how I made my pieces, and just step by step explaining my process. One, I found that was helpful for counteracting anybody saying, oh, you stole this or something, because it's like, here's written proof of how I made this piece. But also it allowed people to learn and connect with the art on a deeper level, whether it was talking about what the art meant to me or how I made it. It appealed to both sides of the collector and artist mentalities. And so I found writing about the piece in conjunction with releasing the piece was really helpful. And so I recommend that. And then, give yourself 3 days ahead of time. Say, hey, I'm gonna be minting a new piece. Here's a teaser. And then the next day you can share the piece in full. And then by the time you release it, people kind of have some excitement around it, or some at least a heads up about it. And then you can mint it however you wish. And whether you want to do an auction or an immediate sale or whatever. I think that's a big part of it. And like kind of what I was saying earlier is that if you want to build your brand in the space, become active in just talking about the space, whether it's, I mean, I don't like to use the term influencer, but becoming just aware of the space and talking about it and commenting on it gives you some validity that I think goes a long way. That people go, well, he knows what he's talking about because he's aware of X, Y, and Z. So I recommend, that's a big part of like that question earlier about like how do you balance social media. But social media is a job because you're learning about the space constantly, and I think you have to be able to learn and evolve all the time in this space because the trends change, the attitudes towards certain projects or types of art change, and you don't want to get stuck. Like, if you were to release like a profile picture project right now versus like 4 months ago, it's going to be much harder right now.
Any more questions?
Nicole, can I ask you, what do you think the future of NFTs are?
Sure. So I think that next year, funny because I've been talking about it quite a bit in the last couple of days. I think next year we'll see much more gaming. We're already seeing it, I believe. So I think gaming will be a very strong sector next year. Music as well. We haven't really seen that much in terms of the music vertical coming in, and I think some marketplaces are being built or already built for that. So I think that will be pretty big. I think we'll see a little less attention on the art side, if I have to be completely honest. But we'll see brands coming in, and so potentially opportunities for artists to actually, I think, work, collaborate, and integrate within protocol launches, brand launches, metaverse worlds and spaces, and all of that. I guess that's my thoughts.
I agree with all of that. I mean, just based on what I've been hearing as well, I think gaming's a big part of it. Yeah, I'm not sure how we fit into that necessarily, but I think there's probably a lot of opportunity to invest into it. But yeah, I'm already starting to see a lot of, opportunities with brands or agencies, and you have to pick and choose because they'll at a certain point you start to get reached out to by a lot of different pseudo celebrities that want to make NFTs, and you have to make a choice. Is this benefiting me or is it benefiting them? And I think as an NFT artist in this space, we have a credibility, and if you lose that, you risk losing long term. So you got to be very careful what you say yes to.
Actually, on this, maybe I wanted to ask you, because I think it's actually a really important topic. Like, have you had any experiences where, or what is your kind of advice and tips when people approach you, whether it's brands, whether it's, let's say, as you said, like celebrities or non kind of like NFT based people working together? So, what are the things that you are mindful of?
Yeah, I'm mindful of. Well, let's say, for instance, someone reached out to me like a year ago that represented an athlete, and they're like, "Hey, would you be willing to do an NFT for this athlete?" And I was like, "Well, what's the idea?" And they're like, "Well, here's the concept. It's going to be dunking. It's on a street scene. He's doing all this stuff." And they basically art directed the whole piece. And I'm like, "No, this is not this is me executing your idea. Like that's an ad agency, essentially like hiring an artist. And I don't think that's not appealing to me. Recently, I was approached by Gemini to do an advertisement for their new credit card, which I think will launch in the next week or two. But they were just like, hey, you can make an NFT of whatever you want. We'll pay you a flat fee up front, and then you can auction it on Nifty Gateway and give XYZ percentage to charity. That appeals to me because one, it gives me creative control to do whatever I want within their concept, which was like it has to be a transformation of one thing to another, which is very generic and allows me the creativity to do whatever I want. And then two, it's wonderful promotion for me as an artist that's still tied to the crypto world, and it doesn't quite feel like selling out versus like doing a Pepsi commercial or something else. So I think there's these fine lines you have to choose of like, is this project furthering me as an artist, or am I furthering them as a brand? Because in the end, the brands are dying to get into this space, and they're trying to build respect. Look at Time Magazine; they've put out like dozens of projects to try and become cool in this space, and they've stumbled many ways and they've succeeded many ways. But you can see these brands really trying to utilize artists to build credibility in the space, and so you have to kind of pick and choose in that sense. But yeah, I've had like some agencies reach out and they're like, well, do you want to do NFTs for rappers or whatever? And it's like, well, maybe, but like I would rather work with a musician than an athlete, because musicians are creative and that sounds like a collaboration. So I think you have to be careful, because in the end, everyone's going to want to get into NFTs. When I left my job in April, I kind of told them, I'm like, this is the next app store, where every single brand and company and celebrity is going to want their own app. They're going to want to be a part of this ecosystem, and it's just a matter of whether they do that on their own, or if they try to utilize artists to get that insider credibility, or influencers. You're seeing it a lot with like big NFT influencers pair up with these kind of brands or celebrities. So I think in the end, the space is very much about trust and credibility, and you have to be very careful to maintain that, because as we saw this week, certain influencers, if they stumble, they lose that credibility, and then their influence doesn't matter at all anymore.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Any
Yeah.
other questions?
I also think there's a lot of opportunities. Like I got reached out. I had a call this week. They're like, "Hey, we want to make this NFT, and we'll give it away for free to all these people that go to this event." Like that falls into that same thing I was talking about earlier with wearables or postcards or giveaways. Those I see as just that falls into the promotion world versus like selling art necessarily, where it's like you can be someone's first NFT and onboard them in a way that they're connected with you as an artist.
What do you think about music? Because I know
Yeah,
you had
yeah.
like you.
I mean, I'm a huge music fan. I don't know the best way yet for it to work. I think, unfortunately, a lot of notable musicians are tied to record labels that won't let them sell the songs necessarily and not give true ownership. And so you have to kind of find these. That's why EDM DJs are so prolific in this space, is because they're not necessarily tied to that, and they can also produce their work. They can just produce more work very easily. They're not a band or something. So I think we're going to see more and more of it. I just don't know. That's why when I did async music, I really liked that, because it gave the listener control over the music to a degree. I don't know yet the right way. What I think there's some interesting ideas with, NFTs give the listener royalties based on streams, which is interesting. But to me, a lot of music NFTs feel like merchandise that you would buy at the merch table of a show, and you're not really, um, you know, you're getting a T-shirt or a poster. You know, you're not getting the music, and so I think there's something interesting there. I'm doing the piece I did for Async Betty's Notebook. We're doing another um, part of it in the next year, which is uh, we collaborated with Sam J Studios, A Lot of Money, Pindar, Moses Sun, and a few other artists, Malavita, and we're going to make a vinyl record that you can buy an NFT that accesses this vinyl record, and all the B side is all these other tracks and all these other artists did artworks for these tracks, and so the vinyl record itself, you can change the front of it to show the artwork by all these different artists, and so I think we're still kind of playing around with what's possible with music and NFTs, but do to me that even that still feels like a bit of a merchandising thing versus necessarily owning the music. You're kind of owning this artwork based on the music. So I think that's I'm excited to see what platforms come out and how people can figure this out, because I'm a huge music fan. I have a huge vinyl record collection. I love going to concerts, and I just it falls into this weird subsection where I can't figure out quite how to do it in a way that really feels authentic, like you're buying a piece of the music.
I think Hyper Icon just said that's so cool. We would love to participate in async music or experimental electronic music. Do you know, Brian, if it's still closed or what async music are doing? Is it now open for anybody?
I think Async is always a curated platform, but
Okay.
I think they're still open to applications. Um, I'm not. I think Sophie works there. She might be someone to contact. But yeah, the person I worked on my project with is no longer at Async, so I don't have as much of an in as I did. But I do think Async is a wonderful platform, not just for the music side, but also for the art side. It's much harder from the music side because you have to find someone that can be really good at sound engineering and production on the audio side.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think async is great. Actually, Mr. Ritchie, who is not on today, but he uses async a lot. I think it's his primary platform, really. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And I think it's still very untapped in its potential. I think we saw, Trevor Jones and A Lot of Money and Matt Cain kind of using the autonomous data aspect of the site effectively, but I haven't seen that part explored very much, with where you can pull data to affect the artwork, not necessarily just have it be layer change. But I also really like Untitled XYZ's Forum Farm, where he kind of created a game in itself within Async, where everyone owns layers and works together in a Discord to change the colors so that they unlock more NFTs that get airdropped to them.
Yeah, that's funny. We had him yesterday do a class on the metaverse, and he actually airdropped everybody forms, so
That's
everybody can
awesome.
now,
Yeah.
can now play with it.
Nice. I got a few forums now. I love Untitled XYZ is one of my favorite artists. I think his stuff is
He's
just so
amazing.
beautiful.
Yeah, and he's so nice as well. Yeah. I think we have maybe time for one more question. There's one on the chat by Pop Art by Beba, which says artists have now been empowered financially, which allows them to have more freedom. This has enabled them to become collectors as well as investors. Our current NFT ecosystem remains active because artists invest in other artists. How important do you think onboarding new collectors is for the long-term success of the space?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's something I've been fortunate and to be in the space a while and purchase quite a few pieces of NFT art from other artists. I think I'm nearing like 500 NFTs or something crazy like that. But yeah, as an artist, I think you should always try to put like maybe 10% of your earnings into other artists' NFTs. One, because it's a smart investment, and two, it allows you to connect with other artists on a deeper level, and like, you can buy a piece of their art and then maybe collaborate with them. And I think there's something really special about that. Onboarding new collectors, I think it's an important part of it, but I also think a lot of, well, I don't think that's up to us necessarily. I think what we're going to see, I think, say like this NFL drop that Flow blockchain is going to do in a couple months, that's going to onboard so many people that will get into the space via sports and trading cards, and then it'll wrap their minds around the concept, and then they'll go, what else can I invest into? And then they'll move over to like Zed Run or some other sports thing, or they'll go to Knights of Degen, which is like a sports thing, and then that'll eventually spiral into them kind of discovering art. And so I don't think it's necessary, as an artist we can try to onboard collectors, but I don't know if it's necessarily the best use of our time. I think in the same sense what you're saying, artists become collectors. So onboarding artists is probably more effective than trying to onboard collectors in my mind, because if you can onboard an artist and they find success, then they become a collector, and it's in a more authentic way than just investment, if that makes sense.
Definitely. All right, I think we are at time. Thank you so much, Bryan. This was like amazing. Super, super cool.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me. It was great to chat with everybody.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to, DM me or hit me up on social media. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye.